All right, so welcome back everyone to the fourth trimester series. Next slide, please. Next slide. So today we'll go over some housekeeping and then we'll have a welcome and some level setting from Ken Harris from the TA and Support Center. We'll then do an icebreaker, which will be facilitated by Kimberly Harper from the Maternal Health Learning and Innovation Center. We're then going to do a recap of the first webinar in the series and then the second webinar in the series. And the bulk of our time today will be spent with a panelist discussion featuring the folks from UNC and from NBEC. We'll have time at the end for a Q&A and then a closing and our regular satisfaction survey. So now I'll hand it over to my colleague Lisa for housekeeping.
Thank you, Olivia, and welcome everybody. So for a quick housekeeping, first of all, this session is being recorded and will be posted on the EPIC website for future viewing. All participants are muted upon entry, and we ask that you remain muted to limit background noise. We encourage the use of the chat box to ask questions or post comments. All questions will be captured from the chat box and we'll address as many as we can. Next, for audio, if you can hear me, you're likely connected correctly, but we'll do a quick review. After you join the meeting by clicking the meeting link, an audio conference box will appear. You can join by either computer audio or phone. To join by computer audio, click computer audio and you should be all set. To join by phone, dial the given number, enter the meeting ID and press pound. Then enter your given participant ID and press pound. You'll then be connected to this session's audio via phone. Lastly, to access the chat box, click on the chat button in the toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom screen. A sidebar will appear to the right. Type your questions or comments into the chat box and we'll send them to everyone. Again, we encourage the use of the chat box for any questions or comments during this session. And that's all for housekeeping. I will now turn it back to Ken. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Lisa, and welcome and good afternoon to everyone. I hope that all are doing well. And I'm really excited about today's session, especially. I've been excited about all of them. So a way of welcoming us is kind of just to remind us, why did we start this in the first place? And so we know that many women and even some medical professionals know so little about the fairly newly described and critical time period in women's lives that desperately needs our attention, the fourth trimester. And we're really excited for these conversations, because the medical care of women before, during, and immediately after pregnancy has long been focused on as a goal of achieving this healthy pregnancy and healthy baby, but too often it's been the fourth trimester, that time between birth and 12 weeks postpartum, it's swept aside or not paid attention to. But we know how critical it is, both for mom and for baby, and for all of us in this Healthy Start community. And one of the reasons why we thought it was important to come together to focus on this conversation. And while this early postpartum period is a time for great joy for many, it is also an extremely vulnerable time. Women and their families, that includes the men and moms that support moms, experience substantial, like physiological, social, and emotional changes during this time. So why then do we not offer careful monitoring, support, and that anticipatory guidance with the same fervor as in the weeks before childbirth? Why don't we do that in order to keep women safe, not only for the immediate time, but for beyond time? Most women would benefit from much closer follow-up during the fourth trimester. So we're happy, and it's fortunate that attitudes toward the fourth trimester are changing. And we're happy to be working with two tremendous agencies, organizations that are doing this work in this space. ACOG now recommends that medical professionals view postpartum care through the lens of maternal health. And so we know how critical and how important this issue is. And for those of you that have been along for the ride for the previous webinars, you're really in for a treat today. So we're here at today, this culminating webinar of the fourth trimester series. And we're glad that you're here, and we hope that you are eager and ready to engage. So thank you for being here today. We look forward to really engaging you. So I hope you're comfortable, and our partners are back. Each of them saw you at different times, but they're back together, and we're all here together in this space, sharing this space. And we hope that it's very fruitful for you today, as we all I feel like we're calling a huddle And when we leave, we're going to go out and do even greater work and taking care of our women, our families, and our children. So thank you all for being here today. And again, I hope you're set and ready to go. And I'll hand it off to our colleagues for the next piece. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you. I think we're getting ready to go into our icebreaker and our connector. We wanted to kind of bring everyone together. We've had separate times where we've presented and had conversations about how to change and impact the postpartum period. And with our day being a panel discussion, we wanted to also give you an opportunity to connect and collaborate and think about what are your conversations that you want to have and what you bring to this time together. So I want to for us to take a minute and think about the questions I think that are going to be dropped in the chat box now. What's your big postpartum challenge that you bring today? I know there's different parts of that you're working on within Healthy Start, and what programs are you thinking about, or what challenges do you bring? The next one, what do you hope to get from your time together today? So we will be having opportunity to ask questions, and is there one thing that we can help you to kind of wrap your mind around and bring that back? And then as you're thinking about that last thing, what do you hope to offer to others? So you're all experts in what you're doing, and you have different capacities, and you do have stuff to offer. So we would like to hear those things together. We're going to take a few minutes and we're going to actually go out, think about that then, and we're going to transition into a breakout rooms. You're going to be there for about 5 minutes. And then after that time, we're going to come back and share out those, what actually came back. So I'll give you 1 minute without me talking to think about those questions in the chat box. And then we will transition into our breakout rooms answering those questions. If there's any questions, please let me know in the chat box before you get swept away. Awesome. Welcome back, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started. So we hope you had the opportunity to take the time and answer those 3 questions. We'd like to take a minute to hear maybe from 1 or 2 groups if you'd like to share what's one of your biggest postpartum challenges that you bring to the room today? If you want to either put it, you can either bring your voice into the room, or you can drop it in the chat box and let us know what's one of your biggest challenges that you'd want to.
Well, we were from room number 1, and we thought the biggest challenges were to get them to do the follow-up for the postpartum visit, and to get them to not only just initiate breastfeeding, but continue breastfeeding for at least 6 months.
Postpartum follow-up visit and breastfeeding initiation.
Correct.
That's one big challenge. Awesome. Anybody else want to offer one more big challenge?
One of our challenges was trying to get the new moms to actually, as they say, try to initiate the breastfeeding. Making sure that there's a lactation educational person there at the hospital that is willing to initiate the process to mom and to show them that how to latch, and if they don't, where to go to if they're having issues.
So it sounds like initiating breastfeeding and actual implementation of and sustainability for the process. So
Exactly.
Challenges. Awesome. Thank you for sharing those challenges.
You're welcome.
I'd also like to hear if you want to share the what you hope to get from our time together today. So would 1 or 2 people like to bring that into the room?
Get some information from others, how they actually haven't gotten their participants to engage in breastfeeding. That's one of the things I would love to hear. New ideas.
Engagement ideas for breastfeeding.
Yes.
Awesome. I think Harriet Smith.
Yes, and also to complete that postpartum visit is another issue.
Awesome. Thank you. And then the last one, if you can, what do you bring to this challenge? Like what skills that you have to help answer this?
Kimberly, this is Asha Emanuel. I wanted to add one more to the list of things that we were looking for. I'm looking for solutions, how to assess and treat traumatic birth.
how to assess and treat traumatic birth.
Mhm. There aren't a lot of validated tools that exist. And in Atlanta, we're seeing almost up to 25% of Black women reporting a traumatic birth.
Thank you for sharing that. I think we may have some things in our toolkit, but we'll definitely provide, and maybe there's others in the room too that can help as well. Awesome. Well, thank you all for taking the time to help us to know more about how we can guide our conversations today, and also to share kind of a common grounding as we enter into our time together with the recap of our conversations in the past, and then moving forward into our panel discussion. And we will make sure we try to offer some feedback for the questions that have come up so far. So Sarah?
Sure. Hey, everybody. On behalf of the fourth trimester team, Kristen, Kimberly, and myself are really excited to be here. And also we need to give a shout out because we are only a part of our team. So also want to recognize Suzanne Woodward, Allison Stubbe, Angela Malloy, Amelia Gibson, and Venus Standard, and many others who are fourth trimester mamas, as we call ourselves. So we had a chance to kick off this series with you, and I'm just going to hit a couple of the highlights, but obviously Kristen and Kimberly jump in. One thing that I am wondering if we want to find a way to share in the chat or at some point is the infographic that we have that offers some of the reasons why women may not get their postpartum visit. I think we shared that last time, and I see that postpartum visit is a theme. So just as a reminder, there are multiple reasons that keep people from that visit, some of which are related to logistics like childcare, transportation, and also just knowing when their appointment is and being reminded about when their appointment is. That sounds like a very simple thing, but it's actually not always clear how a really tired mom, if she's getting that appointment put in her bag on her way out the door from the hospital, the fact that she may not remember when that appointment is kind of important to think about. We also know that there are timing issues, so that the visit, the traditional 6-week visit may just feel late for some women. They've already kind of gotten through some really hard times. Others may not trust their provider and really may not want to go back and see that person. And this is where, if they've had a traumatic experience, for example, that may not feel like a place they want to go back. And there are often language issues, and just so there's lots of reasons for us to think about in terms of why someone's not getting follow-up care. And I think that's one of the key themes that we spoke about, is that, as Ken said, the postpartum period is a really important time. It's a really sensitive time of development, both for the mom and baby, but also for the whole family. And it's an interesting time because it's both a very physical time, where we often don't talk about all of just the physical challenges and the fatigue. It's really fatiguing and physical to have a new baby, both for mom and the family, but it's also kind of an existential time. It's a time of thinking, who am I? I am someone's mother now, or someone might be, I'm a father now, or a parent now, or I'm a grandparent now. What does this mean for me in the context of my experience of family and what this will be for me? So it's a really special time, and it's a time where we need to have a lot of respect for this process, listening and support. We also have heard from many of the women that we spoke with that, we try to put things in buckets, like this is your the contraceptives, this is your postpartum visit, this is infant care, this is mental health care, breastfeeding over here. But in reality, it's all connected. So the pain someone might be feeling, the disrupted sleep, may also create challenges with a relationship, or may lead to feelings of anxiety, for example. So I think it's up to you all to use all of your wonderful skills to understand this is a really complex time, and understand that some of these factors are often interconnected, and thinking about where your lever for change is may not always be what you think it is. a couple of other things. So one thing that some of the work that Kristen and Kimberly have been doing, we are really learning that you all need to assume that the people that you're taking care of did not get complete information about the postpartum period, about post-birth warning signs. We find that in traditional prenatal care, there's not a lot of preparation for what it's going to feel like and be like to be postpartum. There's an assumption that I think a lot of this happens in the hospital, but if any of you have ever been in a hospital with a newborn or had a friend, you'll see that there's just so much information coming at you all at once. It's a very difficult time to learn and understand something new. And then if they're not getting back to their provider for 6 weeks, you all may be the most important source of information in her life. So for those of you that are working with people, couples, families, while they're pregnant, we would encourage you to take the time to really talk with them about what they might expect and to prepare the way. We have one tool that we are still testing, and we have an updated version that we'll be posting soon from our work with moms. But we do have a postpartum planning tool that's actually used as a conversation that you might want to consider using with some of your clients. And so we will put a link to that in the chat. And that might give you some ideas about how you might have conversations and how to help plan for that really important time. Another thing we wanted to mention based on some of our research is that some moms need extra love. And so if you have a mom family in your case, breathing parent in your caseload that has a baby in the intensive care nursery, we've seen that these folks are often fall right through the cracks because they're not a patient anymore in that NICU unit. Their provider may not be connecting with them. Their home visitors may not be connecting with them because they're not at home. But this is a really a group of folks that are at particularly high risk and could really use the extra support. And at the same time, we know that people whose babies don't live, that may have miscarriage or may experience stillbirth or infant loss, that they also need a lot of extra tender loving care and support. And we have resources for both of these special populations on our website, newmomhealth.com, and in Spanish on saludmadre.com. We also encourage you to remind people that asking for help is a sign of strength. I don't know about y'all, is it easy for you to ask for help? I feel like the older I get, the more I realize you have no choice but to ask for help. But I think that that's actually important. A lot of new families feel like they have to present a face to the world. They may be cleaning up before you come to their house, for example, and feel like to be a good mom, I have to look like I have it all together to be a good dad or parent. And I think it's important to let them know that this is really hard, to normalize that this is a challenging period of time, and let them know that asking for help for themselves and their families is really important. And at the same time, we need to make sure that the supports that they need are available. And so I just think that Healthy Start with your community advisory networks, you have a lot of opportunity to look locally and make sure that if diapers are needed, diapers are available, for example. And I think that the last little thing, and then I'm going to turn it over to NBAC, is that I think it's important for you. We all think it's important that you know things like the post-birth warning signs, because again, the people that you're working with are likely going to trust you more than they're going to trust providers and other folks. And we've heard that often new moms and new parents, they may know who to call, but they don't know what questions to call about. They don't even know if they have questions. And so we've heard over and over again that if they have someone that they trust in their life, that they could text or call, they can help them understand, is this a common thing, or is this something that you need attention? I'm going to support you in getting attention for, is actually life-saving. And so that's a really, really special role that you all play. And I think that covers it. Chris and Kimberly, I'm okay? Okay. And Beck, take it away.
Thanks, Sarah. I was just planning to give a few bullet points, but now you've inspired me to give, to give a full recap. Hello, everybody. Glad to see your faces again. I'm just going to go over a couple of points that our presentation centered on, just because I really want to make sure that we have time to get to the meat of the discussion. Phoebe Westcott and I presented at our last fourth trimester webinar, where what we try to do typically from MBEC's perspective is really center on how are organizations using a racial equity lens to examine any issue, any problem that they might be having. So what we try to do is really put a focus on what are the existing kind of assessments that have been done? What are the structural determinants of health that are impacting your population locally? So there's one slide that we included in the presentation that I just want to come back to really quickly. And it focuses on, in addition to understanding how ubiquitous racism is, also understanding how structural racism is impacting your participants and even impacting your program. So in terms of thinking about using a racial equity lens to apply a broad kind of scoping view of your program, we want to make sure that organizations are prepared to center place, environment, and social determinants in your analysis of exactly what's happening, what's preventing moms from making it to that postpartum visit. And that essentially involves gathering data from your participants. And this could be utilizing existing community partnerships, maybe a survey that you've conducted in the previous year, also just kind of polling moms. What are those things that are preventing them from getting to those appointments? Is it experiences in the hospital? Is it transportation? What are those issues so that you can be sure that whatever efforts you're putting forward, you're specifically targeting what's related to your population? And along with that comes, I guess, kind of the second arm, which is advocacy. So once you've kind of got a better idea of what's happening, centering your place, your environment, your social determinants, you're better able to advocate for those specific structural determinants of health that are impacting your participants, right? So the second arm of the racial equity lens is making sure that we're addressing any aggregated risk for your specific local population, right? And so this follows up with our previous point, which is everything has to be localized. We talk a lot, I think, in kind of the general sense of improving equity, but we also have to understand that there have been existing systems in place, right, that affect us all, but there are also very specific things that will show up for you all in your local climate, right? So making sure that we're actively addressing what your local social determinants of health are. The third in the arm, and all of these build upon each other, is addressing intergenerational or cumulative effects of structural racism on health, right? And so I know this can be a sticky topic, but this involves looking at funding. Do you have the funding necessary to make an impact, right? Are you working on a shoestring budget, which I'm sure most folks are, and expecting a large level of outcomes? And how do you take this advocacy for your structural and social determinants of health and translate that into funding dollars so that you can actually have a platform to begin to impact some of those determinants that are affecting your populations, right? In addition to that, beyond funding, we're also thinking about what does evaluation look like for your existing efforts? Because we all know that funders love evaluation data, they love to see what you've done before. How are we able to harness some of the previous activities that your program has done and turn those into dollars so that we can continue to build on those cumulative effects, right? So we can continue to tear those down in terms of really understanding at each level how each step brings us closer to dismantling structural racism. And then the last point there under addressing intergenerational and cumulative effects of structural racism is thinking about what support you have for shared decision-making. So let's just say, for example, a lot of our efforts are informed by what our participants are telling us, but what other resources do we need to bring to the table to ensure that at every step of the way, we've got shared decision-making? We've got some feedback from participants as to what are the barriers, but how can we make that more robust, right? How do we make sure that authenticity is spread throughout our programs and that we have an understanding of any kind of structural barriers we're putting in place on our participants as well? So thinking about overall, just what are the system level barriers that are preventing birthing people from being able to access those postpartum services? And oftentimes you'll find that those are the same barriers that are impacting other aspects of your programs as well. I think one of the points I wanted to get back to is thinking about how are you using your data? Are you collecting data routinely? Are there community partners that you can draw upon to gather data that's already been collected? How are you harnessing that? I think one of the questions that was sent out at the beginning of our last webinar was, are you meeting your benchmark? And a lot of folks don't even know if they're meeting the benchmark yet, right? They don't know if they're meeting the benchmark, and they're not exactly sure what the barriers are right now. So that's a golden opportunity to really sit down and say, okay, in order to really strategize and to develop responsive activities, we need to know exactly what we're dealing with. And I know, and I understand and get it, that sometimes there's not enough time to collect data because you're trying to run the program. You're trying to evaluate the last program, you're trying to get dollars to the next program. But it's so super important that we have accurate data that tells us what direction we need to be going in. And sometimes that might mean using an existing community partner. Is there a university system that's already collecting data, possibly with your population? Is there FEMA data? Is there other data that you can get your hands on so that you're better able to kind of shape what's happening in your community so that we have a broader look at where exactly we can focus our efforts? Because of course, we can't do everything, right? But we've got our CANs, we've got our community advocacy networks that we can draw upon. Once we've got a handle on what our structural and social determinants of health are, we can draw in those CANs, right, for policy advocacy, right? And that is, I think Peggy hinted to this, and Peggy gave a presentation inside of our presentation just about some of the work that they're able to do with Stronger Beginnings. Is that partnership? We're not all, getting $1 million. We're not getting $2 million, but how do we use our partnerships effectively? How do we use our data effectively? And what are the tools that we have right now that we can use to begin to uncover those social and structural determinants of health so that we can create a roadmap, right? So that we're making step-by-steps to get there. And hopefully in our larger discussion, we'll come back to some of the points that we have here on the slide, just thinking about some questions that we left you all with last time. Just how are these questions resonating with you? How are you really thinking through what partnerships you have, what resources you have at hand? I worked in some really small programs before, and I know that it can be a challenge to think of the things that we have right now because we're so focused on all the things that we don't have. If we just had this, what we could be doing. But I also want to, continuously just challenge us all to think about what can we do with the data that we have. And hopefully we can talk through some of those scenarios in our larger session. Folks can bring, if there's something that you've got in mind, some potential partnerships, maybe we can talk through some of the kinks of that, or really just begin to reframe some of the questions so that we feel prepared, to really get to the meat of what those social and structural determinants of health are for our birthing populations. Phoebe, did I leave anything out? I know we'll have some of these questions to guide our larger discussion, but is there anything else?
No, I think you did an excellent job of taking in all of the slides that we presented last time. So no, thank you. That was excellent. And I look forward to the joint discussion and any questions these guys have.
Sure. And I'll just say one last thing. We do this work in assisting organizations and assisting health systems and CBOs. And we don't have all the answers, but we like to make sure that we're asking questions, because ultimately it will be your local partnerships. It will be who you all know together. Hey, I know somebody who has access to this thing that can help us. And I feel like a lot of times if we don't ask those questions and we're not really probing ourselves to see what resources exist within our team, we're kind of missing out. So hopefully we'll have some questions that will help guide the discussion a little bit later this afternoon to get those engines revved up. And I guess I will hand it back over to main group.
Thank you. So we're really excited now to launch into our panelist discussion. We're going to go ahead and take the slides down and spotlight today's panelists. So as a reminder, we have Anas Mahdi and Phoebe Westcott from the National Birth Equity Collaborative, and Sarah Verbees, Kristen Tully, and Kimberly Harper from UNC. And Ken Harris from the Healthy Start TA and Support Center will also be joining in on the discussion. So we have a list of questions here. Again, we're going to go through some of these in a panelist format, and then we'll open it up to the rest of the group for a Q&A. So you can feel free to chat in any questions that pop up for you in the meantime in the chat box, and we'll compile those for the Q&A portion. We're going to start off with a question that seemed to pop up several times during the previous webinars, and that is, why is the fourth trimester called the fourth trimester? So if any of our panelists want to jump in and answer that question.
I can.
Sarah is smiling very hard. So I was going to say either Sarah or Kristen.
I'll share some thoughts. Thank you. You know, life after birth is called a lot of things. Sometimes it's called aftercare, which is important. You know, and aftercare has been an afterthought. Sometimes postpartum is just called postpartum, and we equate that with depression. I'm starting off with some sort of heaviness, I think. You know, the fourth trimester, I think, is really helpful concept, you know, from decades ago that has been exciting to, you know, see become more common and talked about. And, you know, it's meant a lot of things over time, a lot of focus on babies, not surprisingly, and for good reason. And then, you know, I think about it a lot with regards to the continuum, you know, continuum of journeys through pregnancy, birth, and beyond. And, you know, postpartum is forever. But the fourth trimester draws attention to the fact that, you know, babies need us just as much as they did when they were in the womb, and it just looks different. And so it's sometimes hard to recognize and accommodate those needs. And parents are born too. And that is amazing, you know, and I've lived that. And so, you know, one of the things that Ina said is about authenticity. And I think that, you know, recognizing what this is and the joy and the challenges and just being honest about that, and listening and just being with each other and validating, like, it is that hard. You're not doing it wrong. It's not easier for others. We just usually share the joy, and it takes vulnerability to share the hard things. So I'll close just saying, like, fourth trimester is about, you know, a stage of life that's a really precious part of our journeys, and so should be honored, and, you know, we're deserving of that.
I'll just add a tiny bit. Thank you, Kristen, for that. Yeah, this giving a name to this period that's been kind of unnamed. And for me, at least some of the orientation that I have to this fourth trimester, well, fourth trimester is kind of new for me in terms of phrasing. We would call it like the sacred 90 days, and I think depending on, you know, where, what your cultural references, I think there are lots of cultures that would celebrate this kind of protected period of 60 or 90 days, just to indicate that this is a transition that is like in between, like, you know, fully standing up, being fully upright, and particularly that time period where mom and baby really need to be nurtured just to make sure that, you know, they are making it over to the other side. And so I think in a lot of cultures that's represented in kind of a protection and kind of enhanced surveillance, and that we have not necessarily had that in our Western culture, which says third trimester, that's it, get back to work. You know, you're back in. What do you mean? The baby is out, so there's no need for this. And so I appreciate it being framed in kind of the Western sense of saying this is a continuous process, but also recognizing that it's got lots of other names and lots of other places, but really talking to that special time where mom and baby and family need intense support.
Yeah, and I'll add, I love everything that's been said. I'll only add this because I think from a male perspective, father perspective, community perspective, I like that we're naming it, as you said, because if you don't name it, then you won't value, won't pay attention to it. So the naming of it, I think it's important, especially for the West. So I think the naming is also the mindset shift, as Kristen started out, and really moving to a more calm and natural continuation, I think is important, because we are conditioned to think that 3 trimesters, it's over. So that's what people think, right? And so I love it that we've opened up and this focus on this time period, as you've heard. And then lastly, I think it really, for me, opens up the arms of support for community. So now we're talking about it more broadly. And so I think it's a great opportunity for everyone to kind of get re-engaged, and it brings in the fathers, it brings in the grandparents, which includes grandmothers and grandfathers. It brings community back to this conversation and getting ourselves around women in America. So Inez, I appreciate what you said, because if you go other places, we embrace, some places are doing better at taking care of women. In this country, we don't take care of women and moms. It's a shame. So I think it's great that we have a name now.
Thank you, everyone. All right, the next question came up during our icebreaker. What are some strategies you can use to support women who experience a traumatic birth?
For us, I would definitely say, oh, sorry, Kimberly. For us, I would definitely say you want to reach out to your local community care, community organizations who are able to support mom and baby during that time. It's really important to make sure that as a medical care provider, or even as a community organization, that you have a lot of links to different care providers to make sure that mom and baby have, say, doula care, and there is a thing as a postpartum doula, so you want to make sure you're well educated on different points of access for mom and baby, and also that you are made aware of different angles and ways different angles and ways you can approach attacking the different issues that mom may come to you with, and how to give her those next steps on solving those issues.
So this is something that you all may not know, and you probably shouldn't, but Phoebe and I just talk about trauma-informed care, like over wine. We drink wine and we talk about it because it's something that's very, very important to the both of us, in this setting, but also outside of the professional setting. And one thing I wanted to do, just to add to Phoebe's point, is that there are lots of different traumas that birthing people present with, and it's not solely the traumatic birth. There are birthing people who will be survivors of sexual abuse, who will present and who will have triggers and PTSD experiences throughout the birthing experience, and there are different engagements in care. So I think absolutely connecting folks who have had a traumatic birth, but also taking steps for your organization to become more trauma informed, so that at different touch points, you are linking folks, and whether or not that means you've got kind of general, we talk about in trauma-informed care, having general flyers. We've got flyers for domestic violence, but also do we have flyers that are directing birthing people to specific services, and making sure that there are all kinds of little things that you can do. There are all these little tiny steps, and there are lots of organizations out there that are certifying organizations in trauma-informed care. And so thinking about that throughout the process, not solely at the birthing, at the end, right? But what happens throughout the process as well.
And one of the projects we're currently working on with one of our facilities is creating kind of a process and program for individuals that have experienced a trauma. And that's one of the things we wanted to make sure that we said, that it was not just domestic violence or sexual assault, like any type of trauma, because it could be a simple, well, not simple, but it could be a trauma from the actual delivery, or it could be something that happened previously. How do you work through that process? And so one of the things that when we created this curriculum, is making sure that we've used a tool that, and I can share, I'll send the tool to Olivia so that you can, it was an assessment tool that can start, and we're trying to adapt that to the specific population, working with their patient advisors and their families to create it, and having that network and interdisciplinary conversation. So making sure you're connected in the community, and also making sure that you're connected within the hospital if it's actually identified, or if it's outside of the hospital, who do you connect with? And how do you make sure that you follow up? And the process is really important and key. So when you, I can send that information over so that if you want to share it.
And I think one other, kind of to build on the idea that it's about how you approach as an organization, we also want to name that some of you all might be experiencing some trauma when you're caring with for families that are very stressed or distressed, or fighting systems that are broken. That's hard. And so I think I love that idea of sitting around and making sure you all are talking about that as well, and that that's built into your organization's DNA to take care of you also.
Thank you all. Okay, our next question is, if you were a Healthy Start director, what strategies would you try to improve postpartum visit rates?
I like to tell people what to do. I got some, no, just kidding. There's just a lot of thoughts, but I would say the first thing is I would look at some of your data and look at are there some practices in your community that nobody wants to go back to for a postpartum visit? So I think we always assume it's kind of like one person, but I sometimes I think it's like listen and ask, ask what's hard. How can we, what feels hard about getting back in for this visit, right? So I think some of it is asking and listening, but then also I think kind of looking at some of your meta structures in terms of having a partnership with your clinics and understanding how easy is it to change a postpartum visit. In some cases, those clinics are so full, if you can't make a visit, you may not be able to get back in, right? And also how long are those visits? Some of these visits, I mean, if you are like trying to get yourself up and out the house and you've got kids and your breasts are leaking and you have to take the bus and you get somewhere and it's like a 10-minute visit that you really don't get any value out of it, that's not worth it. And so I think people start to be like, well, that wasn't worth my return on investment. So I think some of it is what is the product they're getting for that postpartum visit? And then I think looking at some systems issues. And then I just think really working with them to help make it easy to do. I get overwhelmed sometimes when I know I have a list of appointments I have to make and moms are also trying to get to their baby's doctor and deal with so much stuff. So sometimes I just think making it easy for them can be helpful. So those are my ideas. So I know there's a lot more than that.
So I'll squeeze in because I know my colleagues have lots of great strategies, but I'm just going to take the easy road and just focus on my strategy would be to work with the fathers, those that are connected with the pregnancy. And I would certainly, one of the things we do with fathers within Healthy Start is really talk about their role and responsibility and how they can support their partners as well as babies and things that they can do to support, encourage, strengthen, and lift up. And so I would spend time, especially around this topic, talking to these men, educating them about the challenges here and things that we learn. I will use the infographic from Sarah's group and things I've learned from NBEC and just share with the men. Transportation, childcare, again, if they can help with transportation again, to ease it so she won't have to take the bus, maybe they can give her a lift. Childcare, hey, keep the other kids here while you go to your visit. Because many men don't understand that those simple things actually make a big difference. And so I think the more he understands, the better he can do. Like the more you know, the better you'll do. And so, yeah, showing him that he cares. And so again, being aware and strong support even during the home, during that time is important that she feels, oh, someone's looking after me. And so I would spend time really helping him understand his role and the value of being supportive. And one thing that I would try, and I would have tried right before I left my Healthy Start program in New Haven, working with dads, but I would do combo visits, combo outings rather. So as we're going to do your postpartum, I'll drop you off and then I'll go to the grocery store with the others and we'll get the groceries while you're there. So again, so there's a purpose to going out of the house because again, sometimes just getting out of the house is a big deal. But if you kind of combine that with other things that are needed, you can kind of encourage folks to go. And so those are two things that I would do, but I would focus on the dads.
That's such
Ken,
a great
where were you?
point. I was like, Ken, why weren't you here for me?
Exactly.
No, I love the idea of a combo visit. I was just sitting here thinking about, how anxiety ridden it can be going out during COVID, and I think that we should make sure that we're keeping that in perspective. I mean, my kids are 7 and 14 and still thinking about, okay, I've got to get them to the doctor. I've got to have this happening and that happening, and I have a ton of support, but also peeling back that layer and saying, what are the other experiences that moms and parents are having inside of COVID? And let's not neglect that. Because I think that, and that's a part of what Sarah, you were saying, like talking to people and figuring out what are the top 3 things that would stop you from making an appointment? Is it, the way that you were treated? Is it, you got too many other things happening in one day, and really listen and use that feedback. And Ken, just to follow up to your point, I think for moms and birthing folks who don't have partner involvement, also like Phoebe mentioned earlier, like what are the community doulas? Where are the community doulas, and how can we incentivize them? How can we, write a subcontract for them to be engaged to support moms throughout? Hey, we got 2 appointments this week. We're going to do a combo visit. Maybe you can do this support for both. And so I think really just trying to expand and really just kind of expand what we've been doing, but then also understanding that COVID makes all those great, bring everybody together in the same space. It makes it difficult, but I would really just try to listen to moms, and then use whatever additional community supports that you have available to you.
Yeah, and I saw in the chat someone wrote incentives, and so I was fortunate in New Haven. Joanne Goldblum, who is the executive director of the National Diaper Bank, started the New Haven Diaper Bank. And so working with her and doing the work in New Haven, we found that incentives do work. And as you all know, a diaper works. So providing diapers to many of our Healthy Start participants at the time helped facilitate them going to visits as well. So the incentives absolutely work, and creative ways of using resources that you have for other incentives. A lot of Healthy Starts now, and some of you on the call may have those baby closets or different things like that. The incentives really, really work. And we've heard that over the years, that having things like that helps women get out to their visits, getting points and all that kind of good stuff.
I was going to elevate the opportunity that we have with schedulers. So like when you have people either in the birthing facility or on the phone afterwards or texting, then like those people who are able to connect with them are incredibly important. And it is not just transactional. I think that's a core thing, like how we frame the importance to this for your health, what an opportunity it is to make sure that you're well and, set up and have the resources that you need. And so like, the question was like, if you were the director, if I were the director, I'd see how the whole team is, right? So that we can support them as a whole. And then when you're talking about incentives, the first thing that popped into my head was like infant, like weight checks, or like when you said combined visit, I thought like that's great about like a family outing. And I was thinking, when I had my little one, then they were like, oh, go for her weight check, in winter. Back then it was flu season, not now, with this context. And then go to your appointment. And I was like, well, can you weigh her here? The answer was no. And that was like, what? It's stunning that in a, baby friendly system and with all the resources, that basic things like that, you expect me to go twice, and so a lot of people, it doesn't make sense. Right? And so it makes sense to not engage,
Thank you. Okay. How can Healthy Start programs work with their community action networks to support families during the postpartum period and improve postpartum visit rates?
Sorry, can you say that one more time?
Yep. How
It went
can
out.
Healthy Start programs work with their community action networks to support families during the postpartum period and improve postpartum visit rates?
Data, I know I couldn't, it went out. It was like audio back and forth. It was like I heard can. But no, I think that we've said it enough, so I apologize again, but data, because gathering that data, talking to residents, talking to the local community, making sure that you're talking to different organizations that serve the population that you're working with can really show you what you probably are missing or lacking in terms of how to serve that community. You can go as far as, if you don't have that information, if you don't have that data, go out and talk to folks, have planning sessions. You probably want to get an idea of what would be next steps to create a network for you all to move forward in making sure that you're reaching out to folks and meeting them where they are instead of trying to give them services that they don't need. And then I would say definitely taking a step back within your own team to look at and reflect on what the information was that you got from those folks, from those community stakeholders, from those people that you serve, and think about what they gave you in terms of, yes, this is working, and these are the services that are really helping us to make big leaps and bounds. And then what didn't they say? What information was, oh, we really probably got to start linking them to community doulas. We really got to start making sure that we're reviewing their data in terms of their health outcomes following, leaving the hospital. Things like that can really make a difference and go very far in terms of what you do next and how you reach out to that population.
Yeah, and I also would say when you think about when you're talking about the period, like if you're talking just about the postpartum period, when are you starting that conversation and asking your community to start that conversation versus prenatally, because or even before you get pregnant, like thinking about the whole timeline of what happens. How do we take it from just being this postpartum, the 4th trimester versus my life course conversations, and really thinking about what's happening the whole time instead of trying to pinpoint one part, think about the whole process. And so when we think about that as a community, then now I can see every part of my community. Like I see how grandma is important and what she does, and she talks about these things, or I see how in those teenagers, like those conversations. So like thinking about your viewpoint, where you're bringing it in and kind of expanding it too.
Yeah, and I like the comments also that I made in the chat. Sarah's recommendation, elevating ACOG's guidelines, I think are great. What I would say, and I found very interesting with my friends and colleagues, and even each of their recaps today. And so Olivia asked a question about the Community Action Network. We call it the CAN, but it's interesting. And I think of each of your respective works. And Sarah, when she referred to the CAN, she called it a Community Advisory Network. And so I think, what can we do? I was like, but no, it's perfect, Sarah, because again, based on the work you do, how do we really become this advisory network, educating, getting information we need, understanding policy? So advisory, so I'm thinking it's a community action network. So one of the things that CAN can do under its action is this advisory capacity. And then it was interesting because Inez comes on and she calls it a community advocacy network. And I was like, that represents impact, action, action, action. So again, a CAN, Community Action Network, should be focusing on this advocacy. And so, and then you all said the word, my colleagues here, you said using partnerships effectively. So the answers you've heard to this question, the response, Olivia, using those partnerships effectively is what each of them have said. And we got to keep moms central to this, right? A part of this CAN. And I think we've been talking about just how fragmented the systems are. And so instead of Kristen's example, instead of sending women here, there, everywhere, all this fragmentation, our goal should be bringing those systems, those services together so they can be served where they are and how they're. So I thought you all answered the question with, my answer would be advocacy and that advisory. There's so much to do. But so thank you both for giving the answers earlier. You didn't know you was giving the answer, did you?
All right. Our next question is also something that came up during the icebreaker. So what are some strategies that you can use to provide breastfeeding support during the postpartum visit?
I guess I'll start for some of the pieces you can definitely, I think we've mentioned it earlier, doulas and lactation, like making those connections in the community for supporting. And I think part of it was the question during the icebreaker was actually related to initiation of breastfeeding and actual implementation and sustainability. So I think definitely going back to your networks in the community, like the support that you have, and making sure that there's that connection. And then also making sure that you have, when you think about implementation, think about how are you implementing it? Who is engaged when you started the process? Like, did you just say we're a baby friendly location and not talk to anybody about what's going to be really effective here? And making sure that you have people that look like each other as you're helping with lactation consultants. I think it's very different when you go to someone and they feel like I'm not being heard. So making sure that they're being heard and that you're able to actually go through the process together. And having, I think one of the things for me was with breastfeeding was having someone that did it for a long time. And I could say, I can do this, because there was that night when I was sitting there like, I do not know what's happening to me and this child. And how do you have this process? But I had a mom that did it forever, and I had grandparents, and I had siblings and friends. And so helping to bring that connection is really important when you think about the whole process, and also thinking about how it's actually being implemented as well. And the connections that you're having. I think when I think about implementation, I think part of the problem that we focus on, or that we don't focus on, is who's the key stakeholder at the very beginning. We create this whole plan and say, this is what we're going to do. And they get to it and they say, well, that doesn't fit for me, versus coming together and saying, we want to do this. And what do you think it would be like? So it goes back to listening and making sure that it fits. And if it doesn't fit well, then make it fit them so that it can fit to reach the goals that you like to have.
My strategy would be around advocacy. And so it comes from my personal experience. My wife had a traumatic birth. We had a traumatic experience at the hospital. My son was in intensive care for 7 days. And so strategy, I was using advocacy just to make sure someone's there with mom and families. I was there alone and they treated me so badly. We had planned to breastfeed the whole 9. But they told me, she's in distress, don't worry about it. And I was like, I was working at Healthy Start. I was like, of course we talked about this. What's going to happen? No one came back and followed up with me. I talked to my wife about it. I didn't know who to go to get to talk with her. No one was there. I was so alone. My son's down in NICU. My wife's in her room, and I was just stuck. And so advocacy is a big piece, and just making sure someone is there with our families. And that's one of the reasons I love Healthy Start, and knowing the folks that are part of these programs, these workers, whether it's a doula, case manager, whomever. I've receptionists from Healthy Start, because I understand Healthy Start have showed up at the hospital with families, because we know how important it is for someone just to be there. So my strategy is just any kind of advocacy, because it's the worst feeling to be at that big old hospital by yourself. I felt smaller and smaller almost every single day, that these folks just dismissed me, didn't take care of my wife, and she was miserable and depressed that she didn't end up nursing our son. And no one ever told her she could do it later. You know what I mean? So all the stuff I know now, I said, no, one person came back to us. And so feeling inadequate, all kinds of things I went through. And I just wish someone had been there for us as a community of a family. So that advocacy is my thing.
I'll just add just a tiny bit to that. I think, Kimberly, you mentioned this is in the beginning, like making sure that you're not waiting until the end. So all of these things are, of course, going to require some pre-planning and anticipating what kinds of issues your moms and your participants are going to have. I think, like Ken said, having a doula, and also figuring out what are the other paraprofessionals that you have in your community. Do you have, are you set up really well with WIC lactation counselors? Like, who else is there? And really maintaining like a current and up-to-date inventory, and really almost kind of establish yourself as a partnership hub, because there'll be lots of people who are coming in and out. Folks will transition in careers. They might be moving on from this or that, but thinking about how you can pull those resources so that you've got somebody at the beginning, somebody who's there in the middle. Maybe that person is gone now, but keeping that list like really up to date. And that, of course, I'm sure that you all are out in these places together, and there's going to be lots and lots of overlap. So just ensuring that you're building partnerships just locally. There's going to be somebody there who's doing that thing that you're looking for. And then the last point of that, I was going to say, this goes back to data collection, is making sure that you understand the reasons why your participants are not breastfeeding. Because there could be, I think that there's kind of a general sense, I think specifically from the cultural perspective, that, Black women don't breastfeed because of X, Y, and Z, or Latino women don't breastfeed for these reasons. So instead of like making these broad kind of sweeping generalizations, understanding what are the other factors that impact it, bringing in those partners, and just to kind of dip back again to trauma-informed care. There's also, sexual assault and other violent episodes that may prevent women from establishing or that kind of early skin-to-skin contact that will help facilitate breastfeeding. So I think it's really important. A lot of these things come up in early intake forms. I know for me in particular, I remember one of my early intake forms was like, do you have any history of sexual abuse? And I was like, I don't know you yet. I'm not telling you. But by the third or the fourth time I got this from the same provider, I was like, okay, fine. Okay, here's that thing that happened. And I love the way I talk about this in another session. I talk about like the way that we frame questions. We have this kind of standard, dot, 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 do you have these questions? And if you're really trying to establish and build rapport so that you can understand what potential barriers might exist, you got to either keep asking those questions, you got to kind of laugh your way through those questions. Okay, I know I asked you this last time, but let's go over this one more time, and really trying to personalize some of the content, because even if you've built a rapport, you might not necessarily get that information that will really help you to shape your program unless that is a very intentional process all along the path, just to make sure that we're not making assumptions about what barriers might exist and which ones may not.
And this is a system that can harm people. You know, your responses to these things might lead to, there's consequences. And so there's a trade-off, like, is this worth sharing? You know, even when they seem trustworthy. And there's this concept of, you know, institutional trust and institutional betrayal. Like, this healthcare should be a system that takes care of you. And Ken, I'm so, you know, your story is moving, and I similarly, well, not similarly, but I also had NICU experience for 7 days, and they brought me a pump, and I, you know, my story's different, but, and it's probably interesting about the ways in which it's different. And I don't think that's a coincidence. But, you know, part of our ongoing research, we've been asking about measuring quality and what, from birthing parent perspectives, like, how would we know if things are going well? And also, how do we do that? Like, not only what, but how. And I just put in the chat that, you know, people are worried about retaliation too. If they might have to see you again, it's not in their interest to say that that wasn't great. So it's complicated, you know. So, like, the takeaways that they like ongoing actual dialogue, like, as part of their care, and to have a serious platform for communicating with those outside of their care team. Just like when we do research, the clinicians don't ask you, it's coercive, you know, it has to be freely shared to be helpful.
Yeah, I think one other thing that's coming to my mind, and this is making me think about Mama Bug with reaching our sisters everywhere and reaching our brothers everywhere out of Atlanta, is, you know, I think how can Healthy Start, how can others build social capital across groups of new parents? So, you know, I'm remembering what was helpful for me was that I was in a breastfeeding support group at the birth center, and we stayed together for a while, and it was just helpful to share tips. And also, you know, it's both easy and hard. You know, there's like all kinds of stuff. And as your baby grows, things change again and again and again, and they get teeth. So I think that finding ways that we can also, y'all can help create groups or small communities where people build their own support network so that they're not relying on the institution, but that they can become to rely with and on each other over time. And the power of group and community is just something that I would love to see talking about more. A lot of the home visiting models are awesome. I'm the expert, I'm coming in to tell you, as opposed to saying, hey, there's like 3 other new parents in your neighborhood. Would you all like to meet up at a park, you know? So then when the power goes out, y'all have each other and can share milk, you know, I think. So I also think there's that power in community.
Thank you so much. Well, time is flying today. I can't believe we only have 20 minutes left. We want to allow folks to ask questions. So you can go ahead and put any questions into the chat box, or if you'd like to come off mute, we can also do that. So we'll just pause for a few minutes to allow you to chat anything in, and we can spend the rest of the time answering your questions.
Olivia, I know we're transitioning, but I just wanted a couple of notes that I've been taking even through this panel conversation. I know early on from the warm-up exercise, we talked a lot of different engagement ideas. People want engagement ideas, but I got like a list of things. I hope folks got some ideas just from the conversations of engagement ideas. And you all saw, I publicly acknowledge that I'm stealing from my eyes, and she's like, give me permission. But I think, that's just creating these hubs, I think, has been kind of cool. So some good ideas. Innovation has always been a mark of Healthy Start. And so don't be afraid to take some of these ideas, and as the encouragement comes in the chat, run with it, because Healthy Start has been known for innovation. We wouldn't be around this long, 30 years, if innovation was not part of what we do. And again, we would not have grown from 15 programs to 101 now. So you all have the power. This power of community, this power of Healthy Start community. So do you all think? I'm excited to hear some of your questions.
Thank you. I see a question about the resources in the chat. We will compile all of them into a document and we'll post them on the EPIC website where the slides and recording of today's session will be. Someone also asked a question about how they can advocate to expand the HRSA definition of the postpartum period, because it's a narrow definition between 4 and 6 weeks postpartum. Does anyone have any thoughts on that?
I think that's where Sarah was mentioned the giving the ACOG, the updated ACOG guidelines, because it has changed, especially if you have any high risk, well, specific like preeclampsia or diabetes, that those first visits have been changed to be like early check-ins, like within the first 2 to 3 days, and then also within like the next first 2 weeks. So I think definitely uplifting the ACOG guidelines and recommendations for that, so that it's congruent with what the current care is. And then I think like it says also that you should be seeing, the touch point should be when the individual needs it, and not just on a time frame. So that's another part.
Thank you.
I don't know what my answer was. This is Cynthia Price. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I had actually sent a direct message to the person who asked that question, because what we here at SIHF Healthy Start found out, we were looking at our data. I'm the QI person so I look at the data all the time. So sometimes that's processed too, because what we found out too is if when talking to your mother and you find out, and we're in the health centers too, so they come to us too, but we also talk to them too over the phone. What you can do is update that parent-child form every time that mother comes in, because it's the selection is you could have multiple selections when they come in. Did they keep this appointment? Did they keep the first week if they had a problem? I think it's categorized. So if you put in every category that participant kept, HRSA is going to see that. So if that participant missed the 4 to 6 week, but came in between 0 and 3, or they came in 7 weeks after, they're going to see when our Healthy Start participants are actually keeping their appointments, and that measure can be quantified. So they can see, well, maybe they're not keeping the 4 to 6 week, but doggone, they came in the first 3 weeks. You see what I'm saying? So, and that because it's in there according to what the ACOG guideline is. So my suggestion is to click according to those categories, all postpartum visits kept, and HRSA will see that.
And I would just add to your point too, for the grantees that are kind of experiencing that as they look at their data, I think it's also significant that they may not have come within that 6 weeks, but if they did show up at a 7th week, there's probably a story there. She may have canceled the appointment for certain reasons, and that's important information. So again, the attempt to keep it could have been there. So I think, again, as we've heard here, just looking at that data and being able to tell that story, because I think that's important for HRSA to have that distinction too. It's not just, oh, we didn't meet the benchmark. It's to be able to say, but we found a certain percentage of women actually made that visit in the 7th week. And here's some of the reasons we've come to learn why that is. because they had a sick child, things like that, because those are realities of the women and the families that we're serving that we need to be able to talk about. So thanks for bringing that up.
All right, please feel free to keep chatting in. We have about 10 minutes left. In the meantime, I will throw a question out to everyone else. If anyone has any examples of successful programming or initiatives they've done to help improve their postpartum visit rate, we also welcome you to come off mute and share those strategies.
One of the things that we will begin to do as part of our QI work is to make sure that participants are aware of all the managed care plan rewards programs that are available. I'm sure it's similar across the country, but here in Ohio, our managed care plans offer gift cards to various retailers for attending appointments, you know, whether it's their prenatal appointments or what have you, but some of them offer like $100 gift card for the postpartum appointment. But the participant needs to be enrolled in the rewards program, which is separate from being a member of the actual managed care plan. And so part of our QI work is that we're going to make sure that everybody's aware of how they can get enrolled, make sure they are enrolled, and encourage them around those incentives.
I just wanted to note that the Earth app, which is taking the bias out of birth, is one tool that I think is an innovation, which was created as a way, I consider it kind of like a Yelp, kind of, you know, what Yelp is like, where you can rate someone, but it's as a place, I think, to put the power back in mom and birthing people's hands to say this was a great provider or this was not a good provider for me. I think there's also the Believe Her app, which maybe Kimberly or Kristen can drop, that's came out of Dr. Shalom's maternal action plan. That's another A that I like to change the meaning of the word in their name, but it's the action plan. And that's another app that they're piloting that's around building online mental health support. And there's just some wonderful apps and tools. So that would be something. And another, like folks are saying, is you're listening to the people you serve, find out what apps they like and they're using, because this can be really great tools for the new parents of today.
We have a lot of great resources in this chat. And like I said, we'll compile them all and post them to the website. I'm wondering if the speakers know of any others that they still want to highlight while we have a few minutes left.
I think it's important, and people may have already seen, but the CDC's Hear Her campaign, I think it's really important to check out, and hearing those stories, if you ever have chance just to go and just listen to a couple of stories on a few minutes each. But I think that just helps. We know that that's out there, but I mean, the experience that I think helps, and sharing that with others. I've heard people sharing it with some of their participants, sharing it with some of the fathers. So I've heard people using it in different ways. So just utilizing those resources that are already out there, just as a way of educating, and hearing people speaking their own words is helpful. Thanks, Kristen.
And I just want to say, like, anytime that we get a chance to talk to Healthy Start, we will, because you are a resource. Like, you are magic for families. I mean, a lot of what we've been listening to focus groups recently this summer, and it just keeps coming up again and again, how what matters is having a trusted person that you can call and share when you're uncertain, and that you and that also that person who's got enough training that they can make sure you get what you need. And so I just think that's so important. You know, we had a focus group last night, and one of the moms said, who had a very traumatic birth experience, and it was not expected. So things happen, but no one was expecting her to go through what she did. And she said, it took me almost dying to realize that I had to speak up for myself. And she really, especially because care is not really well coordinated in the healthcare system, and so she just started coordinating her own care. So number one, no one should have to coordinate their own care. But my bigger point was, like, I think helping people find the voice, being their voice with them, and being with them is an incredible gift to all of your communities. And I know that this is hard, but we can do hard things, as has been said. And so that's just my little up with Healthy Start.
And Sarah, I'll add to you, and can I explain what you mean by magic, what I think you mean by magic? So the M is because Healthy Start matters in this work, and you all as Healthy Start, you matter. So that's the M. The A, I think we're talking about equity. So Healthy Start knows all matter. And so when we talk about equity, it's about all. The G, and you talked about that, the gifts that are represented in Healthy Start communities and the wonderful super dynamic workforce that's there. So the gifts that are there. And we said the I earlier, the innovation that comes through Healthy Start, it's awesome. And being able to share together like we're doing today for folks to share with each other is that innovation. And then of course the C is big old community, because we understand it takes all of us. So that's the magic that Sarah was talking about, everybody.
You're very quick on your feet. You're very quick on your feet. I don't think I could have done that. But I love it, and I want this distributed when we send out these notes. I think it's super important to keep that in mind.
Absolutely.
You've got a new slogan. I love it. I love it.
Thank you. Well, we have a few more minutes left if any of the other speakers have any closing thoughts, and then we'll transition to our satisfaction survey.
I definitely can't follow behind that amazing acronym, but I would just like to say, and you are magical. You got this. You keep that up, okay? Because that was fantastic. I was like, oh, did he just write this down? That is amazing. But no, it's definitely been a pleasure to speak with you all today. And I really hope that this has been, successful in terms of moving you all forward in your work for serving the communities that you work with. And it's definitely, I hope that this isn't the last of the fourth trimester, presentations and webinar series, and that an actual community is started and created through all of this work.
I want to piggyback on Phoebe and also what Sarah was saying. I think that, we're here to bring in a particular perspective, but you all are out there every day doing it. You're doing it. And we're just compiling things, and some things we've seen work in this setting, but you all are right there. And so on that note, I would say use each other. I'm not sure how fluid the communication is between sites, but I would say, y'all got some stars on this call who are doing amazing things, and really just keeping those lines of communication open so that, you all might be rock stars in terms of breastfeeding initiation and maintenance, and other folks might have other, CAN strategies that they've used, whatever your A you want to use inside of CAN. So I would say continue in communication. I don't know if you have a listserv or if it's open enough, so that folks feel comfortable talking to each other. I know it's so weird when we're not face to face, we're not at conferences, we're not doing that kind of work, but it just kind of stretching a little bit to say, hey, anybody have any ideas about this? Or someone mentioned this in the chat. I think that's the best way to kind of keep the innovation circulating, because we're keeping our ear to the ground, but you all are out there doing it. And I was going to say one other thing you can do. I just discovered this last week is you can save the chat if you want to capture other comments from folks. If you click on the chat and there are 3 little black dots down at the bottom, you can click Save Chat, and you'll have Ken's acronym and other resources that folks have put in the chat that might not necessarily be hyperlinks as well, just for you all to refer back to.
Yeah, and maybe Olivia, before you close, you can talk a little bit about collab, because that may be an opportunity to keep this continuous engagement that Inez is talking about, because that we can create a fourth trimester kind of club as well.
Absolutely.
All right. Okay.
Yes. The Healthy Start collab is sort of like a Facebook platform. It's a great place to connect with other Healthy Start staff members around the country, and some of our subject matter experts also have accounts. And so you can post ideas, ask questions, share resources. It's a great resource. If you don't have an account, Tess just wrote in the chat box, you can email healthystart@nhq.org. And if you do have an account, you can click the link there and log in. So we hope that you all request collab accounts because it's a great place to connect. All right. So in our final remaining minutes, we are going to launch our satisfaction survey. A poll will appear on your screen, and this is really helpful for us in terms of seeing how this webinar series went and helping inform our future TA offerings. So please take a few minutes to complete this before you log off. And while you're doing that, I'd just like to thank all of our speakers. This has been a fantastic series and it's been wonderful working with all of you, and we look forward to continuing working with you in the future. So thank you, everyone. And thank you to the grantees for attending.
Team NBEC, we love presenting with you.
Same
Blessings
here.
space with you.
And you all know that we love working with both of y'all. I personally, as well as organization, it's just awesome, man. I love it. We're gonna do it again. We're not stopping this party.
Bring on the magic, Ken. We're here for it. Bring on the magic.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you, Sarah, for that.
Absolutely.
All
Thanks,
right,
everyone.
Have a great rest of the week. All right, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.